Hi, so in this example, I'm going to talk about using Wekinator and connecting Grasshopper to Wekinator and the general structure of how to do that. So this isn't a specific example of how to use it for a creative purpose, but just a general kind of nuts and bolts of how to connect it together. And that's because there's a little bit of networking involved, and it's more helpful to go over the general structure first before we actually go into an example. Wekinator is a neural net in a box that's been created by Rebecca Fiabrink. It's machine learning in a box, neural nets in a box, and so what it is often used for is for creative coding or art and technology purposes. For example, using a webcam to play some music, things like that. You can find a lot of different examples on the internet, and there should be some in the GitHub repository. So we're going to start by opening the Wekinator's examples 1 basic structure in the Grasshopper Arsenal Wekinator's examples folder. So if you open this, you can see there's kind of a 4-step process. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And I'll just go over the general high-level structure before I go into the details. The first step, Grasshopper sends data out via OSC. And what that is, I'll go into in a second, but it sends data out over the network. Using a processing script, it'll receive those messages, convert it to numbers, and pass to Wekinator. Step 3 is Wekinator will receive those messages, and all the magic will happen here. And then step 4 is Grasshopper will receive data from Wekinator via OSC. So we have this 4-step process, and now I'll go into a little bit of the details. So the first step is to send data out via OSC. So what we have on the left is we have a series of inputs, and this slider is our first real input. I could add a few different sliders, but this should stay the same. And so together, this merge component has assembled together a message that looks like this. There's some text at the start with slashes, /wek/inputs, and then some numbers. And this is how OSC message is formatted. And each OSC message has kind of a name to it, and then the data as numbers follows it. And now we have this component, and this is the UDP component of the ghowl plugin. So if you don't see this, you should install ghowl. That's GHOWL. And this will send messages via OSC, which is a protocol called Open Sound Control created by electronic musicians to control software and send data from each other. It's a very fast protocol because it sends pieces of information over the network really fast and in one way without checking to see whether or not the packets got there or not. So it's really good for sending like streams of data, sending messages from your phone to your computer. It's very, very, very quick and very, very fast. And so this should be working. And I'm going to simulate what happens when it doesn't. So actually, if I turn it off and turn it on, sometimes you might see this kind of error message, object reference not set to an instance of an object. And what you can do is you can delete the component. You'll maybe see an error, and then go into Edit, do Undo Delete, and then it should show up again, and everything should be fine. So the second step is to use Grasshopper ghowl to Wekinator, which is a processing component, or a processing-based program. And so if you go into the Wekinator examples folder, there should be a folder called Grasshopper ghowl to Wekinator. If we open that up, there's a folder called Application Windows 64. If you open that up, you can double-click on the exe file that's in there, and that'll launch a program. Depending on your computer, if you have a 32-bit version of Windows, you might want to go into this folder. And if it still doesn't work, or you want to see how it runs in processing, you can open up this file, which is .pde file, and that's the source code, and you will have to download and run processing to look at it. So if you open this program, you'll see this small program, and it'll tell you what it's doing. It says, number 1, it's listening from Grasshopper on port 6447. Number 2, it's converting messages to a Wekinator-friendly format. Number 3, it's sending to Wekinator on port 6448. So it's listening, converting, and sending. There's a white circle here that indicates the status of what's going on. You might be wondering what do ports mean. Well, ports are kind of like the idea of piers. When shipping in a city, if you imagine sending like a boat to, let's say we're sending a boat to San Francisco, or New York, say. New York is one city, but it has multiple piers. It has Pier 56, Pier 1, Pier 5, They're all in New York City, but they're different peers. And so similarly, ports are kind of a similar idea. You may have one computer, but each computer has many different ports. And so when you send a message, you can say, I want to send a message on a specific port, 6447, and any other program can listen on that specific port to just grab that message. You can kind of think of it as like TV channels or radio frequencies almost. And so when we run this, and if we move the slider around, you should see this circle turn green, and that means that it's receiving data and sending data. So the processing script is working because it is doing the second step. It's converting messages from Grasshopper to numbers. And that's because, as an aside, GHOW happens to send out messages as strings or as text, and I wrote this small program to turn them into numbers. Now, the third step is Wekinator, and this is where all the magic happens. Again, I won't show you an actual example of using Wekinator, because that will be in the second part, because I think this process of connecting the general structure is really important. So when you open Wekinator, you'll see this window. It says Create New Project. You can keep almost everything existing. This should be 644A, this should be Wek's input, this should be Wek output. You can change the number of inputs to 1 because we have one slider, and we'll just change the number of inputs to 4 because that's what this example wants. I'm going to click on Start Listening, and I'm going to click on Next. And this new project, you'll see Wekinator show up. I'll go into a little bit more detail on what this window means in the next tutorial. But you can see on the left there's OSE in, OSE out, these yellow circles. And so if I move the slider, what should happen is that the OSE in circle should become green, which it is. So this is great. This means that Wekinator is listening to properly formatted data coming from Grasshopper, going through the processing program, going into Wekinator. So step 3 is done. And then step 4 is receiving data from Wekinator via OSE. And so if I move one of these sliders around, I should be able to see the data in this panel change correspondingly, which is amazing and great. And so now I'm sending data from Wekinator to OSE. And if this doesn't work for some reason, sometimes you might see an error. Most oftentimes, this is because you have another program open, or another US UDP receiver open. So if I copy paste this, for example, if I run the program again, or if I open the next example, so a sneak peek, you can probably see that the first example will most likely complain. It looks like it's not happening that way. But if you have a problem here, I would recommend going in and closing all your other networking components. Oh, you can see. And you may receive some sort of error again. Usually delete it, undo the deletion, it should be fine. So if this receiving doesn't work, make sure to delete your other examples. And this is often because when you have multiple things that are trying to listen, the computer doesn't know which component to use to listen. So that should be it. Now we have this whole workflow process properly set up. We're sending data out. We're moving the slider. It's going into processing. Oh, it looks like it's not working. Here, let's fix this. Delete, undo. Great. So now we're moving the slider. It's going into processing. It's going into Wekinator. And if we move these sliders, they come back out into Grasshopper. So that's the general structure of how this is set up, and refer to the next tutorial for an actual example of how to use Grasshopper and Wekinator.